Hello and welcome to another Bobby Fischer video in which Bobby Fischer plays a wild attack against the Sicilian defense. And let's take a look at this. Now, this game was played in 1992, 20 years after Bobby Fischer defeated Boris Spassky and became the world chess champion. Then, in 75, when Fischer was supposed to play Anatoly Karpov, he decided not to play and forfeited his title. And this is kind of a rematch between Boris Spassky and Fischer 20 years later, or one of the games in the rematch. So let's take a look. Fischer starts off with e4, which he was very famous for playing most of his career. And then we have c5. This is the Sicilian defense. All right, so now Fischer plays a normal move, knight to f3. And what this move does is allow him to push the d pawn, and it'll be backed up by the knight in case it's captured by this c pawn. So a normal move in the Sicilian here, knight to c6, adds a little more pressure to this d4 square. And now Fischer plays bishop to b5, the Rossolimo variation. Here they call it the Niezmetinov, if I pronounce that, Rossolimo attack. So this is also a common way to play the Sicilian, where you threaten to knock out this knight, which is covering some valuable squares in the center here, and threaten to double pawns. So Spassky ignores that and gets ready to fianchetto a bishop and try and grab this long diagonal down through the center, aiming at the queen side. And the game continues with Fischer immediately giving up his bishop pair. And now Spassky captures towards the center, doubling his pawns, leaving an isolated pawn over here on a7 that could be weak in the endgame. So the game continues with Fischer immediately castling his king to safety. And now Spassky continues with his plan of fianchettoing the bishop, lining it up on the center and pointing down here towards the queen side. So Fischer develops his rook, backing up this pawn, and the game continues with e5 being played. So this equalizes the space in the center here, prevents this e-pawn from pushing forward. Now if the knight wants to develop here to f6, the knight can, or the pawn can no longer attack that knight if it develops there. All right, now this is where things get interesting. The computer gives c3 as being best, but Fischer pushes this b pawn, offering the pawn. Spassky takes it, and then Fischer offers another pawn. And at this point, white still has an advantage. If the pawn is captured, well, then white's advantage grows a little bit bigger here. So, in the game, Spassky declines to capture that pawn. Interestingly enough, the computer recommends b3, pushing here, but that's not played. Instead, Spassky finds the best move according to the computer. Now the computer's saying that c5, just protecting that pawn, is better. So the game continues with Fischer capturing. We have a recapture, and now d4 is being played. So Fischer is using some interesting pawn play in this variation of the Sicilian. And so after capture, instead of recapturing, Fischer just develops his bishop, targeting this pawn along with the knight and the queen here. And also Fischer may get ready for a duel between these two bishops, where they can counter one another. And if Spassky plans to castle kingside, then it can be a good strategy to knock out that bishop on g7 and leave all these dark, weak squares around the king. All right, so Spassky pushes forward, and this will allow him, well, another thing it does is prevent this pawn from being able to push forward. The bishop could now move down along this diagonal, or fianchetto, so let's see what happens. First, Fischer captures the pawn, and at this point, Spassky is ahead by what? 1 pawn? We have 5 pawns versus 6. So the game continues with the first mistake of the game. Queen to d7. Now, apparently, this swings the advantage to +1.5 in Fischer's favor. And it looks like queen to b6 would have been better. Placing the queen down here, or excuse me, right here, adding more pressure to this knight. And we'll see why that would have been a better move, because you would have 2 attackers and 2 defenders, and Fischer would not have been able to play this move, perhaps, because then that would have blocked the queen's defense of that knight. So Fischer gets ready to develop his other knight. Now we have the bishop fianchettoing, lining up, down through the center here, aiming at Fischer's king side. And the game continues with Fischer deploying his knight forward, but towards the queen side here. Now, what is the knight doing? Perhaps he will try and attack this pawn along with the queen in the future, with a threat of a check on the king. So the game continues with Spassky finding the best move, developing his knight, getting ready to try and castle kingside. Even though that knight is on the edge of the board, and it's usually not a good idea to put your knight on the edge, that does get Spassky closer to being able to castle. So the game continues with a brilliant move by Fischer. He just throws his knight forward here where it can be captured by a pawn, but there's a discovered attack on this bishop. So, the knight could also capture. Apparently the best move is to go ahead and capture Fischer's bishop here on b2. Now we could see what might happen if the pawn captures. If this pawn captures the knight, well, we can see the bar here jumps in Fischer's favor. So this would be a blunder because Fischer could go ahead, capture the bishop. Now the king can no longer castle kingside. The rook is being threatened here. The best move is to castle queenside into this open area. And that would be pretty bad for Spassky. So if we go back to Fischer's brilliant move here, Spassky does find the best move, capturing the bishop, attacking the rook, and now, what should Fischer do? Well, he goes ahead, captures with check. Now the king is stuck, not able to castle to either side, and the game continues with capturing of material here. So if we look at material, it's even at the moment. Now, this move is played f6. Apparently, a5 would be a little bit better, trying to get that passed pawn moving. And you might be thinking, well, why didn't he capture the rook here? So let's take a look at that move. If that was played, well, that would allow queen to capture, and now you would be targeting, or Fischer would be targeting this rook here, which looks pretty dangerous. And the game might continue with queen takes d6, capture, king steps forward. Now We can capture this pawn, and you get the idea. Oh, excuse me. I must have moved to the wrong square. So, yes, here. Anyway, you get the idea. Fischer would be building up a big attack. Spassky's king stuck in the center. And, it's not looking good. So, in the game, back to what actually happened. And we'll go back a few moves here so you can take a look at this from the beginning of the brilliant move by Fischer. He jumps that knight forward. We have a capture of the bishop. Now the rook is attacked. Knight captures pawn with check here. Spassky runs. The knight is captured, and now material is even for the moment. So this move is played. What does this do? Well, the pawn could have been captured by one of these knights. Now if the bishop captures and the queen captures, well, the queen would no longer be lined up on that rook. So the game continues with a mistake by Fischer here. The only mistake in the game, at least, the computer says it's a mistake. And, Fischer is still winning. What does the computer recommend? Apparently just jumping the rook up here to a5, saving that rook. But Fischer has other ideas here. He attacks this rook in the corner. Now we have queens traded off. And that was the other, if we go back, that was the other point of this. By jumping the knight out of the way, you have a discovered attack on the queen. So queens are traded. And Fischer was known for looking at different variations. And if one was not quite as good, but it was safer, he would usually prefer that line. So this line knocks out the queens. And after this, let's see how things continue. Well, king to e7 was an inaccuracy. What would have been better? Apparently, bishop up to c3, targeting this rook. But Spassky brings this king up, and now the rook will fall here, captured by the knight, and Fischer just goes ahead in material by +2 here. So that's why Fischer decided to trade off the queens and go into this end game with an advantage. Now Spassky does have the pair of pawns over here in this passed a pawn. So if he can get that moving, that could create a little bit of counterplay in the end game. So now we have another brilliant move by Fischer, dropping this knight back. Apparently that's the best move in the position. So capture. Now we have a recapture with a discovered attack here on the king. So that's probably why that was a brilliant move. The king is under attack. So now the best move is found, pinning. Otherwise, where could the king go? The king could try and run. But then this rook could either move up here, trade off rooks, or you could have a fork between the bishop and the king if the king runs over here to f7. So Spassky defends in the best way according to the computer. And now we have an attack on the pinned piece, so that bishop can't move because of the pin to the king. So we have a counterattack by Spassky, thinking that he might as well target this pawn, and then he'll have two passed pawns in the endgame. So capture, capture, and now Fischer has a passed pawn of his own. And also there's a threat of moving up here, forking king and bishop. So the game continues with the bishop pressing forward, preventing that. And now Fischer just tries to trade down more material. So capture, capture, and the king steps forward to help defend the bishop. Apparently bishop to e4 would have been a little bit better. So, why would that be better? Well, the king was blockading this pawn. If the bishop moves down here, it would target this unprotected pawn, maybe forcing Fischer to play this, or move the rook up here and defend. Anyway, we have a check. King is moving forward, attacking here. So what does Fischer do? He just presses his passed pawn forward, threatening to promote in the future. At the moment, the bishop is covering that square. So Spassky pushes his own passed pawn forward. Now, if Spassky would have captured this, well, then the rook can get behind the passed pawn, threaten to push forward. I don't know, let's take a look at that. If this were played, what is recommended? Even better, instead of getting behind the passed pawn, would be to immediately move up here and threaten the promotion. So, there'd be no way to stop this. What if that were played? Well, then we immediately promote. Promote to a queen, forcing a capture. Rook captures. Now what? Yeah, now Spassky would just be losing. All right, back to what actually happened in the game. So Spassky does try and get his pair of passed pawns moving. We have rook targeting the bishop here. The bishop steps back, targeting this pawn. Excuse me. But at the same time preventing the promotion of this passed pawn. So check. Spassky attacks. We have a pawn capture, and this passed pawn is running. So attack on the bishop. And now, kind of an interesting endgame here. Rook behind the passed pawn, usually a good idea in rook and pawn endgames. So the king defends, and now Fischer starts to activate his own king. And it's very important to get those kings activated in the endgame because they can make all the difference when there are few pieces on the board. So Fischer grabs the opposition against his opponent's king. And now, what can Spassky do here? Well, he gets ready to promote his pawn. But as we'll see, his king will be out of play. So the game continues with the promotion. Rook, of course, has to capture. King captures. But now it's too late because Fischer's king will assist, one of his pawns in promoting. So this is where the game ended. Because, Fischer can either move up here and then promote his pawn, forcing the bishop to sacrifice itself. Or, does he try and bring his king up into the action? Excuse me. If we go back here. So it's Spassky's turn. If Spassky tries to block with the bishop and cover this square, preventing the king from helping, the king could just move over here, pick this off, and then get the other pawn moving. So, and the computer gives this a what here? Almost +5 in Fischer's favor. There's just no way to stop these pawns. And Fischer's king is just in a much better position than Spassky's. So I don't know. If we look at what could be a possible play here, if this is played, well then, like I said, Fischer can go over here. Now what? It's starting to look really bad. If the king tries to get up into the action, this will just be captured. Now what? The king starts marching, but now this can move, and we have the pawns marching forward. So if he runs up here, what do they recommend? That king up to e6. But there are too many pawns. What's recommend? And of course this move. What do they recommend here? Something like that to hold the pawns back. But then you have g5. Anyway, I'm not going to play the rest of this out. You can check it out, experiment with it on your own board if you want. But 4 pawns, versus a bishop and pawn. Material is even, but this could be played. So if something like that is played, well then you can just immediately play that. Of course you have to give up the bishop, capture, and then this pawn will move up. So there you go. All right, I hope you enjoyed this video. Bobby Fischer videos seem to be pretty popular at the moment. So I hope this was educational. Feel free to leave comments, like and subscribe to support the channel. Thank you for watching, and have a super chess day.